A story of silence. But listen closely. Connecting minds. Connecting from Africa for the world.
In less than 2 days, one man from one of Africa's smallest nations did what decades of global alliances, millions in foreign aid, and countless joint operations had failed to do. He dismantled a criminal network so vast and so embedded in the corridors of power that many believed it was untouchable. His name is Captain Ibrahim Traore, and his actions did more than seize a shipment of synthetic drugs. They shook the very foundations of how Africa is expected to behave in the world order. Now, you might think this is just another anti-drug operation. It isn't. This is the moment Africa stopped waiting for permission to protect itself. And if you stay with me, you'll see why this single event could mark the start of a chain reaction across the continent, a reaction that certain powerful capitals would prefer you never hear about. Picture this. It's the dead of night in Ouagadougou. 2:12 a.m. A secure line flashes inside the Sahel Regional Command. On the other end, intelligence from Gao, Mali, a place caught between military zones and rebel territory, reports something strange. An unmarked convoy has slipped past local checkpoints. No plates, no transponders, but moving as if it had a shield of protection. Here's where it gets stranger. The trucks were wearing the badges of European aid organizations, the kind of logos that wave you through borders without question, the kind of credentials that tell African customs officers, don't look inside. But why would these so-called aid workers be traveling at night along a route abandoned since the end of French military operations in the region? And before we move on, ask yourself this. When was the last time you heard about humanitarian convoys being questioned? If you believe aid is always what it claims to be, keep listening. You might not think the same after this. By 02:30, Captain Traore's command team was fully awake. This wasn't just a routine anomaly. It was a corridor breach. And in West Africa, corridors are everything. Trade, aid, contraband, they all move through the same arteries. Cut the wrong one and you bleed a region. But let the wrong one run and you poison it. Thermal imaging from drones picked up something no agricultural shipment should have. Constant high heat readings from the cargo holds. The manifest said seed grain and fertilizer for seasonal replanting. But anyone who has handled real agricultural stock knows this. Seeds don't burn at 45 degrees Celsius in the middle of the night. Traore made a calculated choice, one that would violate every coordination protocol the West insists African militaries follow. He ordered, track them, do not intercept until they cross into Burkina Faso. That meant letting them roll for 14 tense hours while every camera, satellite, and surveillance drone his team could muster stayed locked on them. This is where you start to see the difference between a leader bound by foreign approval and a leader who answers only to his own people. No phone calls to Paris. No courtesy notifications to Brussels. And ask yourself, why should a sovereign nation ask anyone's permission to defend its own borders? At 06:03, the lead truck crossed the Burkina Faso line, and in that single moment, everything changed. 06:03. The moment the lead truck's tires touched Burkinabe soil, Captain Traore issued an order no one in West Africa had dared to give in decades. A complete 6-hour shutdown of the northern border. Every crossing sealed. Civilian routes, aid corridors, commercial lanes. 12 outposts went silent to outside requests. 11 satellite relays switched to military control. This was historic. Not since the independence era had a West African state closed a multinational corridor without prior clearance from Western liaison offices. Within minutes, encrypted messages lit up the command terminals. French security advisors demanding explanations. EU development officials sending urgent procedural concerns. UN monitors requesting clarification. All of them ignored. You need to understand how big this is. West African governments have been conditioned for years to prioritize diplomatic comfort over security urgency. That morning, Burkina Faso broke that conditioning. Traore's silence in the face of those calls was more than defiance. It was a declaration. Not today, not on my soil. And the convoy still moving south, unaware that every turn, every stop, every pause was being logged by a defense system rebuilt from the ground up, with African engineers, Ghanaian cyber forensics, and no foreign contractors. In less than a year, Traore had transformed a hollowed-out command into a digital fortress. AI pathing algorithms, terrain adaptive heat maps, and cargo signature analysis tools was all running in real time. Here's the part no one in Brussels or Washington wanted to admit. The tech worked better than anything their capacity-building programs had delivered in 20 years. By the time the convoy was halfway to its suspected destination, the AI overlays had finished their deep scan. The system compared this convoy's route to a decade of freight and NGO traffic data. The result was chilling. 3 previous convoys had taken almost the exact same path, 89% route match, in the past 18 months. None had declared proper manifests. None had been inspected. All had vanished into the Sahel without a trace. Now pause for a second. If 3 aid shipments disappeared into thin air and no one in the so-called international oversight network flagged it, what does that tell you? Either someone was asleep at the wheel or someone was getting paid to look the other way. Which one do you think is more likely? Here's the mini twist. All 3 of those past convoys carried paperwork stamped by defunct NGOs, most of them headquartered in Europe, all enjoying diplomatic fast-track clearance. No inspections, no scanners, no questions asked. And it gets worse. Traore's tech team found thermal irregularities in the cargo logs of those shipments that mirrored the exact heat signatures now glowing in the current trucks. In other words, the odds were high that this was not a one-off bust, but the latest chapter in a long-running, well-protected operation. Ask yourself, how many deadly shipments have moved freely through African soil, while press conferences in Western capitals keep telling the world Africa lacks capacity is to police its own borders? If that doesn't make you question the narrative, you're not paying attention. For 14 hours, the trucks rolled on, carrying their secret through darkened stretches of road where villages slept and border posts stood unmanned. They passed lowland farming zones, deserted mining access points, and the remnants of French military outposts stripped of their insignia but still wired to distant satellites. Every movement was recorded, altitude of passing surveillance drones, axle load readings from roadside sensors, and even minute speed changes that hinted at confidence, not caution. At 1946, just outside Goram, the fixed-wing drone positioned at 3,200 meters altitude sent back an alert. The second truck's cargo compartment emitted sustained core temperatures far beyond what any agricultural lime could generate without an active chemical process. The readings were identical to those seen in synthetic meth labs across Asia and Latin America. High density, stable, and dangerously pure. Captain Traore's field units, 48 soldiers from the National Counter-Trafficking Unit, were already in place, supported by 4 Interpol coordinators and a 3-person analytics group from the African Cyber Risk Bureau. In less than 20 minutes, the lead and second trucks were immobilized without a single shot fired. Drivers were separated, GPS units removed, and satellite uplinks blocked. Here's where the tension turned into revelation. When the container lids were breached using cryocutters, the air filled with the biting odor of crystallized synthetic methamphetamine. Slabs of it, translucent and cold, stacked like glass panels. Later chemical analysis would confirm, lab purified, 98% pure, with an estimated street value of $90 million in Europe. Now let's not be naive. No local trafficking ring could move this volume with this level of engineering and protection. Moments after the seizure, 2 unregistered high-altitude drones began circling the area. Their signature matched Western-manufactured reconnaissance models typically used by defense contractors. Not hobbyists, not journalists, but players with military-grade budgets. So here's the question. Were they simply watching, or were they coordinating? And if the latter, coordinating for whom? This is where the story shifts from a criminal bust into the realm of state-enabled operations. And that's exactly why certain governments would rather you look away. Back at headquarters, the forensics team didn't waste a second. Every container had QR codes and serial numbers, the kind that should lead to transparent shipping records. Instead, they led straight into a bureaucratic maze. The codes matched previous shipments that had slipped through Lagos, Nigeria, and Cotonou, Benin, back in Quantum, same aid classification, same undisclosed contents. And here's the kicker, same final delivery coordinates. Two so-called research compounds in coastal Europe. And those compounds, registered under Agri-Development West Africa, a European NGO supposedly focused on agricultural relief in post-conflict zones. Sounds noble, right? Except there's no real office. The address led to an anonymous suite in Luxembourg. No staff list, no working phone, website hidden behind privacy masking. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Financial analysts traced the money back to a pharmaceutical conglomerate with a history, and not the good kind. They'd already been investigated for exporting precursor chemicals in violation of EU export controls. The same chemicals you need to make meth at industrial scale. This wasn't some rogue operation hiding in the shadows. This was a network hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of humanitarian aid, using the legal fast lanes that Western governments themselves built to speed up relief. And while those fast lanes were moving in trucks and containers, nobody bothered to check what was inside. Now imagine this. For years, African nations were told they lack the capacity to inspect every shipment. But the moment they do inspect, they find millions of dollars worth of poison heading out, with a trail leading right back to Europe. Do you see the problem here? So the question is simple. Were these aid channels designed to help, or were they designed to be exploited? And if this is what Burkina Faso found in just one operation, how many others have slipped through while the world was looking the other way? When the news broke, it didn't travel in the way you'd expect. In Ouagadougou, the government released the evidence openly. Documents, thermal scans, chemical reports, all verified by independent fact-checkers in Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa. Within hours, regional security networks were already backing Burkina Faso's move. Ghana's president went on national TV, calling it a legitimate act of sovereignty. Mali's leadership went even further, praising Traore as a necessary flame in a region long smothered by hypocrisy. But the Western headlines, they told a different story. Burkina Faso detains EU relief shipment, read one. Humanitarian standoff in Ouagadougou, said another. The BBC ran with NGO cargo seized in West African dispute for nearly 18 hours. Not a single major outlet mentioned methamphetamine purity levels. None talked about thermal anomalies or unregistered surveillance drones. Instead, they carefully replaced drugs with phrases like medical-grade biological material. And this is the part that burns. When Africa defends itself, it's framed as aggression. When it exposes exploitation, it's painted as obstruction. That's not journalism, that's narrative management. Of course, this media spin didn't go unnoticed at home. In Bamako, in Abuja, in Algiers, the headlines sparked outrage, not doubt. Algeria and Chad offered legal teams to verify historic aid shipments. Nigeria pledged to investigate multinational exploitation operating under goodwill mandates. South Africa even offered its anti-smuggling AI for testing in Mali. For the first time in decades, African nations weren't reacting as isolated states. They were responding as a bloc. And that unity? That's exactly what certain players have spent years trying to prevent. So here's the uncomfortable question. If your aid system is so clean, why panic when someone decides to check the cargo? The morning after the headlines tried to twist the story, Burkina Faso made its move. Operation Sahara Sands. Clean Corridor went live. 11 key border points across the Sahel were marked for permanent, high-resolution scanning posts, not symbolic checkpoints for photo ops, real infrastructure, with mobile scanners capable of penetrating freight containers, fuel tanks, and even insulated NGO shipments. From that day forward, every single truck, container, and convoy crossing into Central Sahel would be inspected. No exceptions, no free pass for friendly donors. Interpol signed on to a 5-year data-sharing protocol, adding West African humanitarian routes to their high-risk index for the first time since 2008. But the real breakthrough wasn't about Interpol. It was African cooperation. Nigeria's Interior Ministry called an emergency caucus. Chad and Algeria dispatched delegations to Ouagadougou. Together, they launched Africanet Clean Transit, a continental network syncing customs data, scanner signatures, and GPS movement for every single development shipment. In tech terms, it's a digital firewall. In political terms, it's Africa finally building its own gate and holding the key. For decades, Africa's ports and corridors were treated like someone else's supply lines, blind spots carved out by humanitarian exemptions. That era is ending. This isn't about isolation. It's about sovereignty, about not having to bury another child in Gao because poison rolled through in the name of aid. Captain Ibrahim Traore once said, "I don't care what they call me. I care that our children live long enough to be called anything at all." Those words aren't just a soundbite. They're a blueprint. The moment you decide your people's safety matters more than foreign comfort, you stop being a client state and start being a nation. So here's the question. If Burkina Faso can take back control of its borders, what's stopping the rest of us? If you believe Africa has the right to audit what enters its soil, write Africa Rise in the comments. Share this story before it gets buried under the next manufactured headline. Because the more they want you to look away, the more you should be paying attention.